Hi, everyone. I'm McKenna from Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and I'm very excited today to be joined by two legends of crime fiction. We're going to have Val McDermid and Patricia Cornwell here with us in a stellar event. I can't wait to sit back and listen to the conversation. A few announcements before we get started. I just want to give a little reminder that, like all other industries, the book industry is having some major supply chain issues right now. And if you're interested in giving books for the holidays, I would highly recommend pre-ordering or being flexible in what titles you want. We're already seeing problems and it's only going to worsen. So if you're thinking about holiday gift giving, now is the time to be doing that shopping with us or any of your local independent bookstores. As I said, we're going to be here with Val McDermid and Patricia Cornwell. Val's new book is the first in a new series called 1979, and we do have signed book plates for it. As always, I'm going to drop a link in the comments where you can find out more about the authors and their books or order the books from us if you're so inclined. We also just confirmed and announced an event with Patricia Cornwell in conversation with Harlan Coben on November 30th. We will have signed copies of Autopsy, her new book, at that time. It's a ticketed event, but in just a minute, once they start their conversation, I will put information about that event in the comments as well if you'd like to order a signed copy and take part in asking questions to them. Also, if you have questions for today, just drop those in the comments on Facebook or live chat on YouTube, and we'll get to those about 45 minutes in. So now is the time to get to the stars of the show. I'm going to bring Val on. Hello, Val.
Hi, McKenna. Great to see you again.
Good to see you too. It's been too long, but at least we get to chat here today. I'm going to do your bio, even though I'm sure most of the people watching know who you are. Val McDermid's best-selling novels have won the Los Angeles Times Book of the Year Award and the Crime Writers Association's Gold Dagger and Cartier Diamond Dagger Award for Outstanding Achievement. She's also a multiple finalist for the Edgar Award, including for the Fact Crime nominee Forensics. So again, your new book is 1979, and we have signed book plates for it. We're also joined by Patricia Cornwell. Hi, how are you today?
Hello, and so nice to be with you. And hello to Houston.
It's nice to be with you as well. We were just talking beforehand about how these virtual events can bring people together from all over the place. So we're Houston, Edinburgh, and Boston, right?
Houston, Boston, and Scotland.
Yeah.
All at the same time.
All right. Well, let me do your bio as well, and then I'm going to leave you two to chat. Patricia Cornwell is recognized as one of the world's top best-selling crime authors, with novels translated into 36 languages in more than 120 countries. Her novels have won numerous prestigious awards, including the Edgar, the Creasy, the Anthony, and the Macavity. Beyond the Scarpetta series, Patricia has written a definitive book about Jack the Ripper, a biography, and 3 more fiction series, among others. Cornwell, a licensed helicopter pilot and scuba diver, actively researches the forensic techniques that inform her work. Okay, it's time for me to go away. When you're ready to have questions from the crowd in about 40 minutes, I'll pop back on.
Great.
For now, I'm just going to sit back and listen. Y'all have fun.
Thanks, McKenna. Thanks.
Well, first of all, Val, let me start because I just had the privilege of getting to read your book. And I wanted to say a couple of things that, first of all, the character of place in your book is absolutely delicious. It is so rich that if someone's never been to Scotland, if you read this book, you feel like you've just been on a trip. I mean, I feel like my clothes smell like the pubs and the restaurant. I could smell the smoke and of course the lovely single malt scotches and all the rest of it. And I think it's just so smart that you have written about something that you know so well. And I just loved the journey of that. The other thing is you completely capture the world of journalism. And I was a journalist in 1979, which is weird because that's when I started out, was that same year. And so I recognize a lot of the things that you're talking about that just completely without a beat. Never once was I taken out of the story thinking, oh, that's not how that works. Maybe you were a journalist for 30 years. I don't know, but it reads like you were. All of it is just a very rich experience. And I wanted to ask you, first of all, why the year 1979? Why did you pick that particular year?
Well, thank you for those words. I mean, that really means a lot coming from you, because I think over the years that I've been reading your work, one of the things that has always struck me is the way you also use the intensity of description of place, whether that's place in the sense of Scarpetta's workplace, or whether it is the various scenarios in which she finds herself, various parts of the country. Again, I get that sense of that's an important part of what draws me into the story. And I think that's an important element in the best crime fiction, to be honest.
I do too.
Yeah. So why 1979? Well, it's a kind of back to front story in a way, and it comes about because of COVID. All my books really are set against the contemporaneous time that we live in. So I'm writing in the here and now. But when it came to, I finished Still Life, my previous book, Karen Piri, number 6. And I thought, what do I do now? It's March 2020. There's a pandemic going on. There was no vaccine on the horizon. People were dying in their hundreds every day. And I had no solid ground to stand on. I didn't know how to write about the here and now. And I certainly had no sense of what August 2021 was going to be like when this book was going to come out into the world. So I thought, I need to stand on solid ground. And for a while, I'd been thinking about writing a sequence of novels that kind of covered the span of my writing life, if you like, from when I was a journalist through becoming a writer to the here and now up to 2019. And so I thought the end point of this sequence has got to be 2019. And if I go back in 10-year jumps, that takes me to 1979. And of course, 79 was a really interesting year to write about, living in the UK. It was a terrible, terrible winter. We had snow on the ground for weeks, and we had tremendous amount of industrial unrest. There were strikes everywhere you looked. And also in Scotland, we had quite a lot of political upheaval going on with a referendum about a devolved parliament. So it seemed to me that this was a real gift to a writer of something to write against. And like you, I was a journalist in 1979. I was working in Glasgow. I'd been there since 77. And it seemed to me that the great thing about having a journalist as a protagonist is you've got a kind of front row seat, a privilege that other people don't have of access to what's going on, which again allows you to tell the stories that lie beneath in the way that Scarpetta has a front row seat and can tell the story that lies beneath.
But with your book, the whole, that was the other thing I wanted to say, is in addition to capturing the journalism, and it's clear that you either have been one or you've researched to the point that it doesn't matter whether you're one, because it's just completely believable. But what I was also struck by is that you said something that long ago, but as I read the book, and it's not just because I'm getting really old now, it's also you did it in such a way that I'm not mindful that it's all kind of retro tech. You don't care, you don't even notice it. And in fact, it makes me realize, I hate to say it, but I kind of miss the world being a little bit more that way than as opposed to what it is today, where it's tactile. You're picking up paper. It's not everything is cyber, not everything is electronic. And I just thought you did a super job of taking us back into the past. And that's interesting what you said about COVID, because it is hard to, even though we're living in today's world and living with these realities, it's hard to have time or a sense of place as an artist when all you're doing is staring at these backdrops and going, in our little paths that we follow every day with our routines. And so that was, that maybe a little bit why I decided to go back to Scarpetta, because the same thing with you, with COVID going on. And I thought, I want to go back to something familiar. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And I think they're going to really enjoy your book and when it is set, and that it's a world that's manageable and familiar, and the characters all know each other. And I love the way they cook and serve tea and fill their whiskey glasses, and you just get a sense of wonderful camaraderie. And in these remote days of loneliness, I think it's very rich.
And I was fortunate enough to read Autopsy, your upcoming book. And so I think you've absorbed COVID and the current state of affairs very well. And in that same way of going back to things that we understand and we know, you've taken Scarpetta back to the beginning in a way. You've taken her back to where she started in Virginia. And you've made the book very much about that immediate nexus of people that are in her life. But you've also brought COVID in a way that's really very moving in terms of the impact that it's had on the lives of your characters. I don't want to say anything that's potentially a spoiler, but there's a real sense of the world has changed, and not necessarily in a good way in the book.
But that's, I say to people who want to be writers, no matter what you do, whether you're a novelist or a screenwriter, or you're trying to be any of these things, most of all, we're storytellers. And the importance of it is, if we don't tell stories, we don't know who we are, or how we're supposed to live. And now, in particular, it's very important that people find new ways to tell stories, and to tell stories about the world we're in a way that people can relate, but yet they don't. It's encouraging in its own way. It's not something that's dire and desolate and awful. I mean, we have to figure out ways to reinvent ourselves and everything else.
Yeah, and I think people are understanding the value and the importance of storytelling more now, really, than almost at any other time in our history. I was listening to a radio program this morning about scientists, and it was interesting that they were talking about the importance of conveying their world to us in terms of story, not just dry facts, not just dry results of experiments and dry results of testing and clinical trials or whatever, but relating things in terms of story. This is how this matters in people's lives. And I think that the whole world is starting to understand the power of narrative and how that connects with us in a way that nothing else does. I think human beings are hardwired for storytelling. We were telling stories before we had language. You look at the prehistoric cave paintings, and they're telling a story. It's how we make sense of our world. And it doesn't matter if we begin the story at the beginning or the middle or the end. As long as the story has a shape that makes sense for itself, then it communicates with people.
I completely agree. And in addition to that, everybody's got their place in the story. I mean, we might be the ones who write it in some cases, but when people read these stories, they become an active participant in them. And so it's about everyone. And it is absolutely critical to any civilization that they have stories. And you're right, it does go back to the very beginning of time. And I think now more than ever, it's very important that people tell stories and they read stories, and that we remind each other of who we are and how we fit into this world, and also ask questions that are much bigger than that, like, why are we here and who are we? And I've asked that stuff a lot as I get older and read about space and all the rest of it.
Yeah, as the world beyond us continues to expand in terms of our imagination. And I think what's also fascinating is the way that our readers engage with our stories, the way they take our characters into themselves, and those characters that we write, if we do it right and if we do it well, become part of their imaginative landscape as well. And that kind of takes me back to when I started out as a reader myself, as a child reading voraciously. And also as an only child, I spent a lot of time on my own or else with adults being boring. And so I would escape into the world of whatever book I was reading at the time, and I would kind of inject myself into the story. So I would add myself into the story of whatever book I was reading at the time and take it off on different flights of fantasy, take it in a different direction, do something with the story that meant I could have a really important part in it. And I'd tell myself these stories. And in a funny kind of way, I think it's where I started to learn how to edit my own writing. Because I'd tell myself these stories, I'd make up my connection to the book, and then if I'd get to a point where it was a dead end or it was boring, then I'd kind of back up to where it was still interesting and push the story in a different direction, see if I could come up with a different idea to tell this story that had drawn myself into it. And I think that, as I say, that relationship between the reader and the book is a really interactive one. It's much more interactive than watching a movie or going to the theatre or listening to an opera. because you become part of a book as you read it. If you love the book, it becomes part of you.
That's exactly right. It's sort of like watching tennis as opposed to playing it. And when you're reading a book, you are getting on that court and hitting the ball back in your own way. And that's why it's so weird sometimes when you have people at book events and they describe to you how they envision your characters, and you realize that everybody translates these characters into something that makes sense to them. And it may be very different from what you and I think when we put it down on paper.
Yeah.
But that's part of it. That's the life and the art of it, isn't it?
Yeah. And there are those moments when people come up to you and sort of buttonhole you and go, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you did that to him or to her. How could you do that to them? Have you no heart? Well,
Yeah, right.
I have a heart, but it's different from yours.
It's like when I've had people complain about the foul language in my books, and I go, it's not me saying that stuff. It's them saying. Of course, we know that I do say it too. So
Surely not. Surely not. I can't believe that.
Yeah, surely you don't either. I have a funny. If you start out in journalism, you get a foul mouth really quick.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's about self-defense. You'll know yourself from those days in the early days of your career. You have to be twice as good as the guys to be even looked at seriously.
It's true. It's exactly like you're describing about Allie Burns in your book. She has to be better than all the guys if she's going to get the big scoop, and she's going to be the big journalist, sort of the Woodward and Bernstein type thing with this undercover case that she's doing. And by the way, I found that extremely harrowing. I would think I'd be terrified as to pretend to be something, especially what Danny did. I don't want to give anything away, but did you ever do any stuff like that when you were a journalist? Did you ever do any undercover work?
I did do some undercover stuff. Yeah, I wasn't primarily an undercover journalist, but I did on occasion work with our investigations department, and it was scary. It was a difficult thing to do, to go undercover, because you have to maintain your cover, and that's really quite a hard thing. Maybe it's easy for actors to pretend to be somebody else, but for most of us, keeping up the pretense of being somebody else is very stressful.
I don't know.
You're thinking, is this kind of in character, as it were? And I found it really difficult.
Well, then you've got the added complication that if you don't pull it off, you might end up dead.
So, I don't think I was ever in quite that level of difficulty, but yeah, you certainly think this could turn unpleasant. Right.
So I want to ask you about research. And by the way, I hate using that word because it sounds like a term paper. And what I really mean is that storytellers, to be really good at what they do, they need to go out in the world and explore. So I call it exploration and experimenting, if nothing else, like a little kid getting on your bicycle and riding into some spooky neighborhood where you're not supposed to go, but you've got to do it or you won't be able to write a scary story later. What's your method?
Well, I'm not as brave as you. I'm not as bold as you, going scuba diving and learning to fly a helicopter. But my base method is to go and find somebody who does this stuff for real and talk to them about their day-to-day, about how they do their job, about what the ramifications of the job are. But more than that, to get what I think of as the sociology of the knowledge. So you find out from them what it's like in their office, what the people are like that they work with, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, what funny thing happened by the coffee machine. And gradually, as you get to know, particularly in my case, particularly forensic scientists, they tell you all sorts of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't always useful at the time, but you file it away and you think 3 books down the line, that's going to come in really handy. So yeah, I always think the best way to get the information is to talk to somebody who does it for real. And
if you can show up places, sometimes you will see something that you never ever would have imagined, and that is the thing that's so interesting. And because in this world of Google, it's very tempting to sit around and just look everything up and not feel like you need to go out and do anything. But the world surprises you if you show up. You'll see something you didn't expect. Somebody will say something you can't believe. And it also is what infuses your work with life. because you felt something and you pass it on. And I've always felt like, and you do this really beautifully, because I feel like I know this part of Scotland. I mean, I've been to Glasgow, I've been to Edinburgh a few times, but Glasgow in particular, I know or didn't have a sense of it, but now I feel like I've been wandering around there. You put me there, you time traveled, you transported me. And that is what great writing is supposed to do. It's time travel. You say, hey, open this book and I'm going to take you someplace that you've never been, whether it's Scotland in 1979 or outer space or a morgue or all of the above.
Yeah, I think so. And the books that really stay with you are the ones that do transport you.
Yeah.
The book I go back to time and time again, which might sound a little bit strange, is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And that's a book I encountered. I first encountered it as what they call a classic comic. We'd now call a graphic novel. And I just thought this was a magical story with magical characters. And it utterly transported me into its world. And that's what we're always aiming to do, isn't it? And I find when I talk to people who do stuff for real, most of us, we come home from work and nobody's that interested about what happened during our day at work. They say, did you have a good day at work, dear? Mm-hmm. And you're like, yeah, or no, it was shit, but I'm here now and that's much better. And nobody really wants to know the nuts and bolts. But when you or me turn up, we really do want to know. We do want to know what you did at the office today, or what you did at the lab today, or what you found out this week. Tell me about your day, and we're listening. And I think that gives us access in a way that you don't get in the day-to-day, because we're keen, we're eager, we really do want to know. And that comes out when we're talking to people, that we are as passionate about this as they are on their good days.
Well, I think of the Starship Enterprise, and you think of a crew, and there's the one officer, the one crew member that's the communications person, okay? And some of us are meant to be that person. We are to communicate with each other and with the world, and the world communicates back. And if you don't have storytellers, like you just said, how does anybody know what it's like to be a forensic pathologist, what it's like to be an undercover journalist in 1979, what it's like to be a terrorist or pretend to be one, or all of these things that people do for real? How are we supposed to share that if we don't go to the trouble to try to find out what that's like for this person?
Yeah, and sometimes they play jokes on us. I remember being in the lab of Professor Dame Sue Black, the great forensic anthropologist, and we were talking about human bones, and we were talking about the hyoid bone, which traditionally is a bone in your throat that usually gets broken when someone's strangled. Mm-hmm. So Sue was giving me this hyoid bone, which is a bit like a chicken wishbone, and she says, "Look, feel how bendy it is, how well it responds to movement. You have to really push it to break it." And I'm sort of like touching this hyoid bone very gently, and it suddenly snaps. And she just cracked up. And it turned out it wasn't me being violent. It had been previously broken and stuck together. So she knew it was going to break as soon as I started touching it. But it was just that sort of moment where I thought, oh my God, I've done something awful in her lab.
Or when you go, or like you go to the body farm for the first time in Knoxville, and you know the horrible things you're going to see. And the forensic anthropologist, after your first visit there, he takes you to a barbecue place and orders ribs and rice. Okay? I don't need to tell you that ribs and rice are not what you want to see after you've been to the body farm. And then they're all looking at you, and then later they're telling stories about how you pushed all your food away and maybe try a piece of cornbread. That's as good as it's going to get.
Yeah, I had a great day at the National Natural History Museum with a guy called Martin Hall, who is their forensic entomologist. And I'd had a fantastic morning with him, talking about all his work, and he'd been showing me samples, and he'd been explaining to me why there were some carry-on suitcases in the corner of his office, because they had pigs' heads in them. They were seeing what could lay eggs through the zips, stuff like this. And it gets to lunchtime, and he offers me to share his lunch with me. And he brings out his sandwiches, and his sandwiches are in the same container as the maggots.
Oh, God.
And you just, I think I'll pass on the sandwich if it's all the same to you.
Well, back in the old days, people, when I was working in the morgue back in the late 80s, gosh, has that much time gone by? I mean, people would eat and drink down there. I mean, there was not the sort of precautions that we take today, and that was stupid, but it's what people did back in the day. And it was true. You'd be working over a body, and everybody be talking about where they wanted to go for lunch. And after a while, what's abnormal becomes normal. And that, to me, is once you get to that point where the abnormal becomes normal, now you're ready to tell a story. Because now you have fallen into the lifestyle and the mindset of these characters for real, and you know how to tell that story because you know what you start feeling like they do. That's what's important for me. Do you find that important for you to sort of try to feel what these people feel?
Yeah, I think it's important to try and step inside somebody else's shoes. But I think when you're in that place for real, it can sometimes it can do the opposite. It can have a numbing effect on you. It can make you take for granted these things that are terrible things. And that's one of the reasons that I got out of journalism when I did. In the late 1980s, I was the Northern Bureau Chief of the national newspaper. And so a lot of my time was spent in the office shouting at freelancers down the phone or dealing with my team of reporters or whatever. But when it was a really big story, I would go out the office, I would go out there and be on the ground. And within the space of 6 months, I had the Lockerbie disaster when Pan Am 103 blew up in the sky above the town of Lockerbie in the Scottish borders. And a few months after that, the Hillsborough football ground disaster, where 96 people died in a crowd-crushed disaster, really caused by appalling policing. But I was in both of those when they happened. I was at Lockerbie within a couple of hours of it happening. I was in Hillsborough within 45 minutes of it starting. And I looked around me at my colleagues, and I thought that there are two ways of dealing with this kind of thing. You either let yourself be sucked into it emotionally, and that does one kind of damage in the long term, or you build a barrier and you shut yourself off from it, and that does a different kind of damage in the long term. And I thought, I do not want to be the person to whom that damage is done. And it's time for me to start digging my escape tunnel and do something different and actually concentrate on trying to make a living writing fiction, because I don't want to be like these guys when I'm 50.
I understand what you mean. I only lasted 2 years as a journalist. There were other reasons because we were moving and what have you, but I worried a little bit about the same thing, because I thought there's sometimes I will have to get too numb to something, and I don't want to turn into this kind of person where I'll tell any story at any cost because that's what you're supposed to do. And then that's a tough line to try to find the right way to follow. But what I wanted to say is, getting back to, though, like seeing the horrors of a plane, carnage on the ground, of a plane crash, or these types of things. My rule for me is I try not to expose myself to things that I do not think Scarpetta would be dealing with, especially if she didn't have a good reason to, because there's a lot of horrors in the world of crime, particularly when you deal with like forensic psychiatrists who have recordings and things of victims, of what's being done. And there are things that you've probably been exposed to, I have been, that we would never share with anybody. And Scarpetta would never share those with anybody. And so I have to, I don't want to spend a lot of time with people in prison. I've been on talked to death row people a couple of times, and I worry what these things would do to me. So I wonder, it's funny you would bring this up because I hadn't thought about it much, but we do find ways to put some sort of protective shell around ourselves so we don't get into airspace that's dangerous.
Yeah, I think, and it's, for me, the thing that I suppose ultimately keeps me safe is that I know when I'm writing something that this is not real. I can step away from this. I can close the office door. I can go back to my family life, or I can go to see a movie or whatever, and nobody's going to be dead before morning.
Yeah.
That the real world is a different and very frightening place, and a dangerous place for so many of us. But the stuff I'm actually writing about, the stuff that occupies the interior space of my head, is not real. And that's what saves me.
I was gonna, so which leads me to this question. When you do what calls your exploration, because I'm first of all, do you walk around with a notebook when you're, because these places you describe, I feel like you've been in them. Do you go and take notes? I mean, I do that. I go into places and take pictures and notes. How do you log these details?
Mostly, I don't write stuff down. I absorb it as I go. I'll write down detail things, technical things, or you know,
Yes.
particular detail of a building or something. But by and large, my method is to go around and to absorb as much as I can, to spend time in a place or spend time with people, and I don't take very many notes. And then I generally find, experience tells me, the stuff that sticks is the stuff that matters. The technical stuff, as I say, I take notes on because I know that I won't remember that.
Oh my God. Well, what do you think I have to do? Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And it's the bane of my existence. You know what my idea of a peaceful, wonderful outing is, to not have to take notes while I'm doing something. But you're right, with the technical stuff, that's why I got all these things back here, these journals, because of all the stuff. But if it's just trying to absorb the way something feels, you're so much better off. Like James McNeill Whistler, when he was painting his nocturnes in the late 1800s, he would go out in a rowboat on the Thames, and he had his little boatman who would take him out there, and he would sit there and he would look at the way the sky was. And he didn't write anything down. He didn't draw anything, and he didn't say a word. And then he'd go back and paint it from memory. And that's some of his finest work. And you feel the mood, maybe because he was so busy feeling it himself and looking at it with the artist's eye, and not the sort of the eye of somebody, like in my case so often, where I simply have to write these things down so I can look them up later. You know, you get into it more.
And I think one of the things that that I think you do, and that really works really well in creating a world in fiction, is that your writing uses all of the five senses. You know, you talk a lot. You talk about smells. You talk about taste. You talk about color. You talk about sounds, and textures. And very often when I'm reading a book, I'm making it up as I go along, because the author has not given me those clues to hang on to. But when you paint that picture in my head when I'm reading, then the rest of it I can fill in with confidence. I'm not groping for things. I'm not going, oh, what kind of place is this? What kind of garment is this person wearing? What's the smell in the air? And I think that's an important thing as well. And I try to do that, but sometimes I think I've not. That when I go back through the first draft, I think I need to put more of that. I need to put more in that gives that sense of totality.
Well, I feel like in 1979, I feel like you accomplished that with on rocket fuel, because it is right down to the way people are dressed and the way they look. And actually, as I've been reading your book, and I'm writing something new myself right now, and I have to be careful about reading other people sometimes when I'm writing my own stuff, but it actually it usually might mess me up. In your case, reading your book it's actually been helpful, because you describe things so beautifully that when I would go back to my desk, I would slow down a little bit and say, hold on, let's feel what this corridor looks like. What's out the window there? What's the rain sound like? What has that person got on? What am I smelling right now as this happens? And because it's easy also to get in a hurry and a little bit lazy about all that. And we got to transport people there. Why else do we bother? And why else do they read?
Yeah. And we have to, one of the things that I had to think about very carefully, writing a book that's set in the past. I mean, I'm now told that this kind of writing, this is period drama writing in 1979, not to overload it with too much detail. And so I was kind of trying to keep the balance right, so that I only wrote about what people are wearing or what they're doing or what they're looking at when I would do the same thing in a contemporary novel. But I had to. I also thought I can't rely entirely on memory here. And my main source of practical research, apart from people who were around at the time, was to get into the newspaper archive. And that was really difficult because the National Library of Scotland was closed for a big chunk of lockdown. And I couldn't get my hands on the archive copies of the newspapers. But finally, I was able to get back and get my hands on the bound volumes from 1979 and able to see exactly what people were wearing and what kind of furniture they were sitting on and what kind of food they were buying from the supermarket. And that was really helpful. But I'll tell you the really scary thing. I was reading back numbers of the newspaper I used to work for, and I kept coming across stories with my byline that I had no recollection of having written. Really? Is that me?
You did it for a while. You did it for over a decade, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you had to make some mistakes as a journalist. We all have those bad days. And back in the old days, if you made a mistake, at my newspaper, the Charlotte Observer, they would put your article on the bulletin board and they'd have a big red circle with a crayon or a colored pencil around it. And then the next day in the paper, they would print a "We were wrong." Okay. Now, did you ever have mistakes like that where you didn't mean something, but it happened? I want to hear an example if you can think of one.
I can't think of anything particular like that.
You're smarter than me. I made many of them.
I'm sure I made plenty of them, but I can't recall them offhand. I certainly didn't get anybody chasing me about them. But there's actually one I allude to in the book that was a colleague of mine. He went off and did a story about this couple who apparently had gone out with each other years and years before, and then they'd been separated by circumstance. And then they got back together again. And she was pregnant now in her 40s with her child. And it was all this great story of this reunited with the love child. And we ran the story. And then the next day we got a phone call from a young woman who said, "That's my mother." And, she's all this story about thwarted love and all that. It's just not true.
Oh, no.
She's still married to my father.
Oh, no.
So yeah, but unfortunately, nothing quite like that happened to me.
Well, my first job as a journalist was to update the TV guide. Now, see, I didn't start off probably in the stellar way you did. I got the lousiest job the whole newspaper had, where you would get all these blurbs on your desk and you would type them in for that day's soap opera or whatever, and then they would print the magazine once a week, like TV Guide. Well, I didn't even watch TV very much, so I didn't know if I made mistakes, and that's where I made so many mistakes. And I'll just tell you a couple quick ones so that people don't think that that everything I do that is about flying helicopters or whatever. You have no idea how much I screw things up, and that I'm not even necessarily all that good at a lot of that stuff. I just do it so I know what it feels like. But a couple of my infamous errors, I had to update the Saturday morning cartoons. And when it came to Daffy Duck, I made a typo and the copy desk did not catch it. And Daffy Duck was spelled with an F instead of a D. So it was Daffy. That ended up with a big red circle and exclamation points on the bulletin board. But I bet the ratings were through the ceiling that morning for that cartoon. I will tell you that. I would have the wrong sports teams playing each other in some televised event, and the phones would ring off the hook in the newsroom with all these people drinking beer and furious. So my career is probably a lot more checkered than yours sounds like.
I did have one incident early on in my career when I was a trainee journalist. I worked down in the West Country in Devon, and one of the local councillors was a guy called Bob Blank, and his surname was Bob Blank with a K. And the first time I wrote a story about him, I sort of wrote the story about Bob Blank, and I get the chief sub coming over and said, "You need to find out this guy's name. You can't just put blank. You can't just put a blank. You got to get back onto him, find out his name. You can't be anonymous." And I'm like, "His name's Blank. Don't be ridiculous. Nobody's called Blank."
Yep.
I had to go and find the council minute report and point to the council minutes and say, "Look, Blank, that's his name."
That's like I went to some event and I was taking notes, and what I learned first thing as a journalist, you get someone's name, their address, and how old they are. That was the first 3 rules. And so I was doing the story and I interviewed somebody, and the next day the story's out, and this person, so said Shannon Park, and Miss Park said this and Miss Park said that. Well, the only problem with Shannon Park is where she lived. That was not her name. And so that was, so Shannon Park, it sounded like a good name to me, but yeah, those are some of my finer moments.
I can't believe you haven't got a character in the book somewhere called Shannon Park.
You know what? Now I think I must, don't you think?
I think so. No, it's out there. You have to put that little private joke in for people.
It will be my private tip of a hat to Val McDermid when I do it. So we were talking before we started a little bit on what's next for you with Allie Cross. What can we expect after 1979? When don't want to be spoilers, but what happens at the end, and boom, she's going to be off to something else. And then we see little hints of and I like the way you put those newspaper stories at the end. It was very surprising. It kind of startled me when I got to the end. And it's like I'm looking at her work product. I'm looking at these stories. I thought that was really cool.
Thank you. I thought it was a good way of getting to the end of the book that closed some of the things down that otherwise would have taken a lot of narrative to get to. So it was a way of bringing things to a conclusion, I suppose, a resolution in an economical way. But I like the idea of having Allie's actual stories in the book too. So next book is 1979. 1989, 10-year gap. And I'm hoping, because I've always struggled with writing books with the same character back to back, which is why I've got such a varied output over the years. Can't write two books with the same character back to back because I get bored. Very low boredom threshold. So what I'm hoping is that the 10-year gap means that Allie will have changed, she'll have developed, she'll have responded to the things that have happened to her, and she'll be, in effect, in some respects, a different person. And I have to figure that out, what's happened in the interim and how that's affected her. So 89 is a really interesting year, I think, in lots of ways. Apart from anything else, you've got the fall of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall coming at the end of the year. You've got the media wars between Maxwell and Murdoch, and that's one of the things I want to examine over the course of these books.
That would be very interesting.
Yeah, the changes in how we consume media and how the media has changed over 40 years, how technology has changed, all of these things. And of course, there are the sort of more domestic stories of what's happening in the UK that I have to somehow translate into having a wider reference to the wider world. But it's an interesting time to be writing about. We're having big discussions in our house at the moment about the music. I think the music in 79 was better than the music in 89, but hey, that's one of those things that people can argue out for themselves. Because that was another thing. I don't know about how you work with music and things like that, but I usually have music on when I'm writing, but it has to be music without words, because otherwise it's distracting. Oh. But on the other hand, getting back to 1979 was really made much easier for me by the time machine effect of music of the time. You know what it's like. You hear a track, you're maybe doing your shopping or whatever, and you hear a track over the sound system, and immediately you think, I was in such and such a bar, I was dancing with such and such a person. Or, oh, that's when I got my heart broken, or, oh, that was our song, that terrible relationship that was a car crash from start to finish. And all those little things that just plug you straight back into the time and the place. So that's one of the things that I'm doing at the moment is my 88, 89 playlist.
Well, that's going to be very interesting. And I think it's very interesting that you say that if you write about the same character 2 years in a row, you get bored. In my case, it's Scarpetta who says that. She says, I have been bored so many years now by this stupid woman writing about me year after year after year. Why doesn't she know how bored I am with her? But the difference is, you see, I created a character who's a lot smarter than I am. And that's why I don't get bored with her. But I don't think the feeling is the same in reverse. You see what I mean?
Well, I think she's still managing to keep you interested. It's quite clear.
Well,
and even though you have sort of taken her right back to the beginning, it's really interesting to see that kind of full circle thing and where that takes her next.
Well, this will sound crazy to say, but at least in my case, when I look over all my years of writing books, I realize I've made mistakes with things or things I could have done better. And the biggest mistake I made is not recognizing how critical location is. I actually thought if I moved Scarpetta around, because I was moving too, so why not, that people might enjoy learning about new areas, but not so much. That's why I put her back in Virginia, because Virginia is my emotional landscape. That's where I got started. And I know it emotionally in a way that I don't know any other place really. And that's one of the reasons I very decidedly have reintroduced that strong sense of place, Virginia, putting her back where she started. And that's like, again, in 1979, you do such a great job of that. And again, going back to what you said about not being that conscious of trying to give too many details to, like, hey, everybody, it's 1979. So you don't have magazines lying around that remind us every other minute that it's 1979. And you don't think about it. And you don't need to think about it. You're just completely there, and it seems normal. Einstein said the only reason we have time is so that everything doesn't happen at once. And when I read your book, I'm not so sure. He might be right about that, because I feel like it's all here now. It's all happening.
And of course, that's how it is for us, for you and me, writing what we write. It is always ever present. It's always in our heads. The whole back catalogue is there, here and now, because that's because we created that, and it's our world, and it's our fictitious universe, and we can walk around in it, and we can walk back the cat to where we started with this and feel like it's here and now, because in our head it is still here and now.
Well, and in the world of quantum mechanics, there may be more here and now to all that than we even realize, because I know from working on the Jack the Ripper investigation for so many years, when I get involved with certain things, it's almost like you're poking a stick at an energy field, and it will start poking back in weird ways. And I bet you've had that experience when you've been working on something and you get this eerie sense that there's something alive there, that it's not just words that you're putting together or information.
Yeah, and sometimes there are weird things where life very definitely imitates art in ways that you don't expect. That's very much the case. I've had kind of weird things when I've been working on books, that the outside world has kind of replicated what I've created in my imagination, and that's very unsettling, I have to say. You said earlier, by the way, that you're working on something. Is this a new Scarpetta?
Yes, I'm following up Autopsy with the next story that jumps ahead maybe 6 months, and she's in the middle of this outrageous murder trial, and all these other things are going to go on around it. So I'm in the early stages, and but very much, I really couldn't be doing this had I not left her for 5 years. And I think I understand what you mean about, why when you do 2 in a row, that you start getting a little bored. For me, I think I did start getting a little bored. And I think also because I was doing 1 a year, and when you get to like 24 of these things, it's like, I thought, I don't really know what else to say anymore. We really had enough of each other when we parted company 5 years ago. And that was the best thing I could have ever done, because I now am enjoying her all over again, and actually more so than I used to.
Yeah,
and
you've come back with excitement.
I'm sorry?
You've come back with excitement.
I feel excitement about it, and I've learned a lot of things. And I think I'm looking forward to telling stories in differently, but the same, and also better.
Yeah, I always found alternating, between series and standalones, that when I came back to a long-term series character, when I came back to Tony Hill and Carol Jordan, or to Karen Pirie, I was excited, because I kind of felt, okay, what have you been doing in the last year that I've been away enjoying myself with somebody else? What have you been up to? What's been happening in your life?
It's also a good way to get rid of characters you've had enough of. 5 years later, you say, you're not coming back. I'm sorry, you didn't make the cut, baby.
Yeah, and it's almost like they stop speaking to you. It's almost like, series characters sometimes end just because they decide they've had enough of you. That happened to me with both the Lindsay Gordon novels and the Kate Brannigan novels, they stopped talking to me.
People would think we're crazy when they hear us say that, but it is like that. Do you ever have a day when you go to your desk and the characters just aren't there? Someone didn't tell them they were supposed to show up this morning?
Yeah.
Hello, where are you?
Yeah.
Where are you? Do you have that happen?
I'm in the middle of a short story at the moment, and the central character just seems to have gone walkabout.
That will be a very short story then.
Very short story, yeah. She needs to get back. She needs to come and knock on the door or something. But yeah, I sort of got wandered off into this complete little world that I keep forgetting that it's got to be her story. So I've got to bring her back and sort out where I've gone off the rails. But yeah, you're right. But sometimes they don't want to be in your head that day, and that's usually a sign. To me, that's usually a sign that I've gone wrong somewhere, that I've made a misstep, and I need to reverse to back where they want to be back in the house.
Well, I had that happen with the Wynn Garano series, which was just 2 books. They were novellas that I was asked by the New York Times and the London Times to do these novellas. This was back in 2008 or something. Well, that was an assignment. It wasn't, I had to come up with someone brand new, and it could only be 110 pages long or whatever. And so it was like writing by prescription. So I did those 2 books. And then I set about on my own to write a 3rd one. And I was doing research and all the rest of it. And I was halfway into it, and it wasn't working. It just wasn't working. And I quit. And I realized that those characters, they had visited with me as long as they intended to, and they're gone now. And there was no point in trying that. I've had that happen a number of times, usually after 2 books, maybe 3. And then it's like, that is as much as those people have to say. And they don't want to come back anymore.
Yeah.
It's an odd thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's a brave decision to step away from characters when they're not working for you anymore, and not try to force it. I'm sure you've had the same experience as a reader, where you're reading a series that's completely run out of steam and it's going nowhere, and you kind of feel maybe you should be trying to write something different, because it's quite clear that these characters are kind of dead to you now. If I ever felt that about my own characters, then, even if I hadn't noticed, I would hope somebody would tell me.
Well, I think that, it's all like a mathematical equation. There are certain things that make things work, and if they're missing, then it just doesn't create anything. It doesn't go anywhere. It just sits there. And with Scarpetta, for example, one of the things that I realized is that when I was doing these books back to back, and it was also, I was right on the heels of all the CSI stuff starting up back in 2001 or whatever. For all of the 90s, my stuff was the forensic stuff. And each book I try to show you something different. Well, then these shows started, and you can't compete with them because it's not even real, a lot of it. There aren't mirrors on autopsy tables anymore so that we can see the face on camera. Not that really matters, but you know what I'm talking about. It's not the same as what we see when we go into these places. And so I think I decided that each time I had to show you some new technology that was going to be better and cooler, nothing you've ever seen before. And by the time I got to Chaos, the last book 5 years ago, I said, the only thing I can do next is have something in outer space. Well, 5 years later, there is a scene in outer space. She doesn't have to go there. And by the way, I tried to send her. When I opened Autopsy originally, it started on the space station, and Scarpetta was up there. And I spent forever on that first chapter because something bad happened with people on a spacewalk, and she hears it, and she's looking out the window of the cupola, and is going to have to deal with it when they come back inside. And there was no chapter 2. Nothing would happen. And then finally I heard this is like, she said, I don't want to be up there. Would you please put me in my garden in Old Town Alexandria, Virginia, and I'm not going into space. Get my ass off that rocket. No, thank you. And so I said, okay, then whatever. So nope. So took her out of space, but she does work something remotely that's got to do with up there, because you know this from all your forensic expertise. If you get where there's no gravity, can you imagine what's going to happen to a bloody scene? Oh my God. Imagine blood spatter in space. All that up there, if you get cut, you'll bleed out, a kind of bubble, and it's like ectoplasm sort of sticking to your skin. It doesn't just, and then it's going to dry and it flakes off and floats everywhere. And it's going to end up going whichever way the fans are blowing. So you cannot tell things the same way when physics changes. And that's, to me, is fun, because but she doesn't need to go up there. And I think that I have learned that I'm not going to worry so much about keeping up with these TV shows. I'm just going to keep things a little bit more familiar and circle the wagons. Everybody likes the characters to be close. They like you're showing them in your world. I think people are very drawn to the past these days because where we are and the remoteness of it, just the isolation that I think people have been feeling these last 2 years. They want stuff that's cozy. Kind of, even if it's gory cozy.
Yeah, and I think, the characters that you've created over these years with the Scarpetta novels have that sense of family, albeit a dysfunctional family in many respects, but they all understand the weight of the past that they all carry, and nobody else understands that from the outside. So of course, when we have to pull the wagons together, then that's the safest place for them all to be. It's where they understand their past and they understand their history and why people behave the way they do, why Marino is the way he is, why Lucy is the way she is, why Benton's the way he is.
Hello.
Hi. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just couldn't, I was sitting and listening and I was like, I'm going to have to interrupt. There's questions. So we're going to try to run through some of these questions pretty quickly. There are several that are repetitive on a theme. So I'm just going to summarize what people want to hear about. A lot of people want to know if there's going to be a Dream Team event at Harrogate again in the future.
Well, I would love to host you at Harrogate, Patricia.
Val, I'd be hosted by you anywhere, my dear. You just say that you just snap those queen of crime fingers, and I'll come running.
That would be a great event to do.
I'd love to, sure.
Yeah.
You and I could talk all night long. The only thing missing is a bottle of scotch.
Well, we could manage that in Harrogate.
I think we can. And I think we will.
Okay. What advice?
Scotch in our house.
What advice would you give to wannabe authors? And let's start with Val.
Be patient with yourself, but be persistent. I wrote my first 4 novels on Monday afternoons because I had a full-time job, and Monday afternoon was my time off.
Wow.
And I ring-fenced that time. And the rest of the week I spent thinking about what I was going to do with those 5 hours on Monday, what I was going to do next, and what I was going to revise from what I'd done before. And over the period of time, those pages just build up and build up. And if you prepare for that time and you sit down and you use that time, it's amazing how fast it will come together.
How about you, Patricia?
I would agree with that. My early books, I was still working at the morgue, and I would write when I would come home or on the weekends or if there was a snow day or whatever. But the other thing that I would say is go out and explore. I mean, if you're interested in something, see if you can go see it. Like if you, like I would do. I mean, I got into the morgue because I asked if somebody would give me a tour. I've been to prisons because I asked if someone will give me a tour. I'm always trying to go to places everyone else is trying to get out of. But that is where you get these ideas and you see things that move you, and then the stories will find you. So even if it's just going for a walk, when I was a little kid, I would go hiking up the mountain and take a piece of paper and a little pencil or magic marker, and I'd sit up on a rock and look at the valley, and I'd try to write a poem or try to write what I'm seeing. And that it's very important to do that. I mean, you don't just create this stuff out of nothing. You've got to go do you got to go out and see some things for yourself. That's what autopsy means. The Greek word is autopsia, which means to see for yourself. So go out and see some things. You certainly, your journalist certainly does that in 1979.
Yeah.
Okay, so both of you, what is the most surprising element of research that you've come across? And it doesn't have to be for this book, it can be for anything. Have you ever been just hugely surprised when doing research on something?
Well, well, I can, in that, and people will laugh at this, in that when I originally was told by Scotland Yard that I should look into Walter Sickert as Jack the Ripper, possibly, I started researching that thinking I would use something fun like that from a novel. I never, ever thought that when I started researching it, that it was going to turn and it was going to become real. And I was going to find stuff. I went, oh my God. I was very surprised in that case. And I remember saying to my agent, I almost wish this didn't happen, because now I feel like I've got to do something about it and I don't want to. Val, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I've had lots of wow moments with forensic scientists. But there was one particular one. Again, it was Professor Sue Black, who was telling me that recent research had shown that although the cells in our body renew themselves routinely as we go through life, and in the course of about 7 years, our body completely renews itself, apart from one tiny, tiny bone in the ear, which is so small that for a long time anatomists didn't even count it. And apparently this bone stays the same from the womb to the tomb. And if you analyze it, it will tell you where your mother was living when she was pregnant with you. And I just was like, wow. And I just thought, I have to drop this into my next novel. And I just dropped it in passing. And I get a phone call from Sue, and she goes, yeah, I see you used that piece of information that I gave you. You might have waited till I'd published the paper.
Oh, that's funny. That's a good. Yeah, but the truth will never fail to surprise you. If that's why I say, go out and see what finds you. You will get. I mean, the first time I went to the body farm, I never would have imagined this. I walk out there and here's a dead body lying out in the open, and it's a man, and he's dressed in his Sunday suit, a black suit and a tie and a white shirt, lying on the ground, decomposing. And I said to somebody, what's this about? Why is he dressed like this? He said, well, this is somebody who went off to a hotel room and committed suicide. And his family donated his body, and they wanted him to be in what he had died in. And I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, this is really happening. People are doing this kind of stuff. And so I'm surprised all the time. I'm starting to think I'm not very imaginative, because I'm constantly surprised by things I see that I would not have thought of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question for Val, very specific one. Do you have any plans to do a book like The Grave Tattoo, where you wove in historical aspects of HMS Bounty and Wordsworth and all of that?
I have no immediate plans for anything like that, because, as Patricia says, you have to wait for the idea to come along and grab you by the throat, which that one did. And I need to have that moment where somebody says something in passing that grabs me by the throat and makes me rush off with a brilliant idea. And I don't know, it could happen tomorrow.
Okay, and for Patricia, any plans for TV or movie, Case Scarpetta?
Well, I have a deal with Jamie Lee Curtis, has a production company, and she has a first look deal with Blumhouse. Jason Blum is a big producer, like the Halloween movies. That's how that all happened. And they have the rights to Scarpetta now. We just made a deal to turn it into a TV series, but we're the early stages of that. But I know I'm in very good hands with Jamie Lee Curtis. She's read a number of my books and she gets it, and she's brilliant as a producer. I don't know who will play Scarpetta or anything else yet, but that is is going on, and fingers crossed that it will work out and be something everybody likes.
Okay, and the last question for both of you is, have you ever had your character do something that has really upset your readers?
I have. Oh God, I've had more than, I've done a number of things where it's not so much Scarpetta upsets people, but I upset people, because when Benton Wesley supposedly died, I never stopped hearing about that. And, why did you kill off Benton Wesley? And then someone asked me at a book signing, are you sure he's dead? And I said, oh, thank God for you. No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Oh, gee, he's not dead. And now he's back. So thank you, whoever said that. That was a mistake. I should never have killed him off. Marino did a very bad thing in Book of the Dead. I should never that shouldn't have happened either. And so when my readers get upset enough, I pay attention.
Well, I know that my readers get upset by some of the things that I do, but I do the things that I do because they make narrative sense to me at the time. And my characters don't do things that freak me out because I'm the person who's in charge. It's my universe. I'm God, and nothing happens that I don't say so. I've never understood that thing when people say, "Oh, the characters just went off on their own and have a mind of their own." My characters don't have a mind of their own. There's nothing they do that isn't under the control of my imagination. Sometimes, as I go through a book, it occurs to me that there are different ways of doing things because of the way that I have written them up to that point, and I think, "Oh yeah, I could do that." But that's not the character going off with a life of their own. It's me realizing that there are other possibilities with what I've created already.
No, I take full responsibility for these bad decisions. It wasn't Scarpetta, Marino, or Benton, or any of them that decided, made those brilliant decisions. It was me. And some of them, like, it's weird. I try to be true to what seems to be natural to happen at that time. And it seemed to make sense that Benton would, have a bad thing happen in Point of Origin. But it wasn't, I don't know why I decided that, but I sure did undecide it. And so I make these decisions, but I will tell you, I've learned over the years that sometimes maybe wasn't the best one. You make better decisions than I do because you're God and I'm still learning.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
On that
We'll
note,
debate that one another time.
I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to both of you for your time and energy today. Obviously, we are here to celebrate Val's new book. We have signed copies.
Wonderful. Everybody read it. You'll love it. You'll savor it just like I have.
Absolutely. So we have signed book plates available for it. And then I've put information about our forthcoming event with Patricia Cornwell and Harlan Coben for Autopsy, of which we will have signed copies. That's all in the comments. So thank you both so much. Val, you have a wonderful evening. Patricia, have a good rest of the day.
Well, thank you for having us. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again. And Val, thank you. This was wonderful. And it's always wonderful to see you.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much. And everybody out there should turn up for you and Harlan talking to each other. Autopsy is a fine read, and Harlan is a fine guy.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to sign us off. Everyone have a great rest of the day. Thanks for watching. And I'll be back on here at 7 tonight for the Best American Mystery Short Story Collection that came out today. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.